And of course, this time is very famous in that there was a lot of murder going on. As you may or may not know, there was a reason why Ivan was called Grozny, which doesn't exactly mean terrible in Russian. Grozny means more like threatening. But terrible is pretty good for of an epithet for Ivan. So Ivan the Terrible's time, along with that, sees the creation of two more I guess, entities, two more political phenomena. Can I give this to Kiev? Can I give Pereyaslav to Kiev? That's probably not a very good idea. No, it's not. Can I release anyone? Bashkiria? Nope. Sibir? Nope. Astrakhan? No. I guess we'll just be content with, if we don't take that, can we release? Yes, we can release Sibir and Astrakhan. And then you can give me some money, because I spent a lot of money for this war. So I better them get something in return. Now that's a lot of territorial expansion. Very good. Yeah, you need to get back to Severny Ural so that you can defend the colony. And also I can, I think, attack Nogai. Anyway, yes. That expansion ended up, just like we know well and well, it ended up hurting the finances of the state, and it ended up causing long-term instability. But another aspect of that expansion was the eastern expansion, which it ended up massively benefiting Russia in the long term in ways in which those who ordered said expansion couldn't really think. Why can I not? Okay. Couldn't really think. What ended up happening was that a new type of political entity was forming in southern, I guess we'd call it today, Ukraine, even though back then it wasn't Ukraine, which was the Cossack host. Now, the Cossacks were Eastern Slavics, so just like Russians and Ukrainians, bit of both, and Orthodox, but they kind of lived like nomads, and that was kind of weird, I guess. That's kind of weird to explain to somebody who doesn't really know a lot at first, because it seems kind of a contradiction, but I guess it's normal because of what ends up happening there. There was a huge power vacuum in this area, in the areas of the Don River, and so, of course, all these people who were first serfs under Muscovy, or under the rulers of Kiev at the time in Lithuania, once the hordes start collapsing, they end up starting to run away and form their own political entities in this area. And eventually these little hosts start falling under the political sphere of influence of Muscovy, who used them a lot against Poland. That's not what we're talking about right now. A lot against Poland and Lithuania, because most of them still lived under territories of Lithuania. Right now, all this madness that's going on in the area of Kiev pretty much was all under Lithuania in our timeline. And unfortunately for the Cossacks, that meant subservience to Muscovy. Only formal, because they were very, very proud of their freedoms, etc., etc. But still, formally, they were still subjects of Muscovy. No, I need to get more colonies. Oh, we're very close to forming Russia, actually. Very, very close. And yes, then the Cossacks started also expanding east, and once Kazan fell, pretty much the gates were open. This entire area, where we now have Sibir here, was now like up for the grab, because the local political institutions just had completely fallen over. And to spearhead said expeditions, we're still in the time of Ivan the Terrible, the Cossacks were used because they were a bit of a kind of fringe group, quote unquote, that could be expendable, and because they were, of course, very, very effective fighters. And their background, now we can convert heretics peacefully. We can, I want to convert, damn it. Let's convert shamanists. Because I would have wanted to convert Muslims, but I guess it's fine. And which province did we get? Shamanist problems? I don't really know. Anyway. The Cossack expansion into these areas was favored also by the fact that the Cossacks had a nomadic lifestyle, so they were really used to a lot of the things that their Muslim and Tengri counterparts in the east were already doing. And all these areas also had various different settled populations who mostly relied on things like fur trade to live. Those were mostly exterminated by the three big, ways of just plain old killing, diseases, and essentially resettling and forced resettling, etc., etc. Just like the expansion in the American West with the Native Americans, that was essentially what happened in the East. So you have a situation now where hundreds of years after those facts, you have Russian populations that are majority in pretty much all of Siberia, except I believe Tuvan Republic. So like here in the middle of nowhere by the border with Mongolia. So you have essentially what you could in some way call a genocide. But that was just kind of how things went back then. And really, another big problem. I don't really... Stop that. Another big problem for Russia as a state that was actually a problem that carried over into the modern age is a problem of geography. Now, Russia as a whole got invaded many times. That is because if we look at geography, and I look at the terrain map mode, wait, can I do it without the fog of war? Fog of war. That is the worst terrain map mode I've ever seen. Anyway, that kind of illustrates what I'm talking about. It's a marsh. That's farmlands, never mind. That really doesn't. But if you know what the geography of Europe looks like, you know that there's a big giant plain. Stop that, fog war. A big giant plain that goes from about northern Germany all the way through to the Ural Mountains. That's called the North European Plain. And the natural borders of Muscovy, well, there aren't any natural borders of Muscovy because there aren't any natural barriers that separate the heartland of Russia, which in Muscovy's age is this, but in Kiev's period was this same thing, from far away foreign invaders, both from the east, because you have the steppes over here, and through the steppes, of course, various different invaders came through to Europe, even before, you know, Russian culture really existed. Should I just take them? I think, yeah. And even from the west, where you have, of course, just a big giant. Well, the only real obstacle are the marshes around here, the Pripyat marshes. That's the only obstacle. And of course, with this giant frontier, as we now have in Muscovy, that's really not a big obstacle. Well, it is a big obstacle, but you can just go around it. Well, of course, this is a huge strategic problem. They didn't really think of it analytically at the time of Muscovy, but the expansion in the east creates a what some people call Bavaria. Bavaria is the emperor. What some people call a strategic spare. I guess spare is a weird term, but a spare territory, a strategic depth. And all this territory in the east that Russia will end up, taking over, is a backup should an invasion befell the mainland, the core, which is in this part around northwestern Russia. And that's seen very, very well with the Napoleonic Wars. So, in a way, Ivan the Terrible initiating the expansion in the east. Oh, a Sunni mosque. No, I don't want Sunni mosques. That's probably the worst thing. But I guess if it's just a minority religion, we can allow that. In Murom, that's over here. Whatever. In a way, ends up saving Russia from the Napoleonic invasion hundreds of years later. Now, that's not an exact comparison, an exact thing that you could say happened. It's not, a correlation and causation, but it is one of the things that ends up helping the future Russian state in being so damn resilient in the face of losses, because they have that backup territory in the east, because they have the geographic barrier of the Urals. Even during World War II, this is of course very, very important. And I'm way out of time, so yeah, I'm definitely out of time. But I think you'll just see a cut, and you'll go to the next part of the video right now. So yeah, I'll see you soon. I hope that you've enjoyed, and I hope you will join me next time. See you. So at this point, Muscovy went about actually controlling the east through, well, just pretty standard means. They built fortifications in key locations, they played on local rivalries, and did certain things like that, just like you would normally expect of colonizer powers. And eventually, with, ups and downs, the Muscovite control of the east started to consolidate and went further and further, and I believe the Muscovy reached the Pacific Ocean somewhere in the region of 16 something, probably in the mid of the 17th century. I don't actually know exactly when, but something like that must have been the date. I don't exactly remember. Yes, and that, of course, has pretty far-reaching repercussions over Muscovy. Meanwhile, back at home, all that centralization that was happening during Ivan IV's reign, plus also Ivan IV's, well, I guess personal defects. He was very paranoid, as you may or may not know. And oh, meteor sighted. I didn't lose stability. That's good. Yes, everybody's getting placed under interdict. All that centralization that was happening did have its downsides. Now, the Oprichnina, which was this sort of crown territory that was created northwest of Moscow, eventually started becoming sort of a state, well, within a state, as in it had its own type of administration, which was separate from the normal Muscovite administration. So that, of course, created lots of headaches in terms of how bureaucracy worked, But at the same time, it allowed Ivan IV, as a ruler, to break from the standard old families that sort of usurped, I guess you could say usurped power. Of course, the old families of the nobility, who he thought were his enemies, of course, and replace them in the new oprychnia with his own men, sometimes drawn from the merchant classes, sometimes drawn from lower nobilities. And of course, that drew a lot of hostility from the nobles. In the meantime, there were also other types of conflicts and plots within Muscovy itself, and that led to lots of nobles actually defecting to Lithuania. Now, to actually understand this, you need to understand how basically feudal culture works for nobles. They were doing fealty to lords on their own, I guess, terms, right? It was a two-sided agreement, not just, you're my vassal. So, of course, a nobility that feels like it's got its own rights that it has to defend and privileges that it has to defend can actually, withdraw fealty in theory from one sovereign and give it to another. So that's what happens. And that happened in the middle of lots of wars between Lithuania and Muscovy over Livland over here. Actually, I believe that the Livonian Order secularized because it became Protestant while I was, I wasn't showing things, and I was just going ahead and doing some stuff that wasn't really interesting. So yeah, you secularized, which is interesting. I didn't even know that orders could secularize in MEIOU and Texas, but that's fine. That's really good. I like it. And of course, it's expensive. Oh, getting you, because you're cheaper. And of course, that also meant that the expenses that the state had to, run for the war became even worse due to the fact that there were defections among the noble classes. And so, conflicts plus internal instability, never really all that good. Plus, the increasing paranoia and weird events of the time kind of escalated into the oprychnia and the state within a state rising in power. And so there were these officials, right, from the oprychnia called the oprychniks, who were, well, sometimes you hear, them referred to as a secret police, but it's more like an internal militia, right? And they're, of course, going around killing troublesome people, pillaging territories of enemies of the crown, all that kind of stuff. And that internal devastation plus the external battles against Lithuania, plus also at the time, as I said earlier, the horde that split up into various different hordes, and one of the major ones, Crimea, was also fighting Muscovy. Well, in fact, it's going to be fighting Muscovy for pretty much the best part of 150 years from now, although later on as a vassal of the Ottomans. That kind of meant that all of the development that had been happening during that time, all of the centralization, kind of was to waste, right? Because the devastation from the fighting and, of course, the internal instability kind of ruined all of that. And that was sort of a bit of a mischance for Russia to become a modern state like Western Europe. And another thing that kind of didn't allow Russia to modernize, I guess you could say the term modernize or westernize for that period, was the fact that while this, I hate this event. Actually, no, it's not as bad as I thought. Yes, unrest is fine. Of course, that will lead to a rebellion if we're not too careful. That's near Moscow, right? Oh no, Novosil. Okay. Just send my troops there. During that time, Muscovy had started to become also culturally closer to Western Europe, despite all the hostility towards, you know, Latins, etc., etc., and also took behind Western Europe in the start of actual political literature. Now, this was very, very limited at the start, but there were people around Ivan IV's court, especially because of all that. Oh, come on. Go away. Because of all that hiring of new men that was part of the time, and we just got a lot of discoveries. Interesting. That, of course, attracted new advisors and thinkers to Moscow. And, of course, that gave rise to also texts and literature that was independent of the church, because until now, pretty much writing and in general just literary scholarly occupations were reserved to the church, right? Of course, just like in Western Europe before the Renaissance and all that. Well, not really reserved, I guess, but de facto it was just church business. And wow, you're big. You're really big. That's a huge sultanate. And Transoxania also looks pretty evil. Yes. So all of that turns into political literature as well. Now, during the time of Ivan the Terrible, of course, you also have a sovereign that wants to be a bit of a absolute ruler. So that little flame gets snuffed out fairly quickly because of, again, pressures from up above. But we also have... Oh, also... I can form Russia, I think. Can I? Yes, of course. I can form Russia. Oh, wow. So we gained a lot of Casus Bellis. Or, well, I guess Casus Belli is already kind of... Ah, so that's Russia. And what are my claims? All of this. So we get a claim to go down the Volga, which makes sense. Then we get a claim to go up to the Dnieper, which also makes a lot of sense. Nice. Nice. Very good. So we're about, like... Yeah, I guess 100 years ahead of time on that. We also have a claim on you, but that's because we created one ourselves. We can make a lot of states. Oh, awesome. Interesting. I guess it's because we are an empire, right? No, we're a grand principality. Does that mean we're an empire? I don't think that... No, we're not an empire, technically. Although, the notion of Russia in the modern sense and, well, empire are very connected, actually. Established the Russian Patriarchate. That's actually another very important thing that happened actually after the reign of Ivan the Terrible, though. That was already during... Oh, damn it, I thought it was going to pop up an event. But yes, creating the Russian Patriarchate. So this is something of the Orthodox Church, right? The Orthodox Church, the way it works is that it's a decentralized church, right? There's different heads called the Patriarchs. The first five are the Pentarchy, so Rome, Constantinople, Antioch, around here. Then there was Alexandria, and I think Carthage at the start. So that was the Pentarchy. But then, as more states sort of became under the political wing of the Byzantine Empire and became Orthodox, they all started to create their own patriarchies if Constantinople gave them permission, right? Because, of course, that technically meant that that church, that national church, I guess you could call it in a modern term, even though it wasn't really a national church, that state church was on equal terms, at least in theory, with Constantinople. So it was a pretty important decision. And of course, after 1453 and the death of the Byzantine Empire, that meant that various different churches started becoming de facto autonomous. And, well, a bit later, also the Russian Orthodox Church created its own patriarchate based in Moscow instead of its Metropolitan of Moscow being this sort of the head of the church in Russia. Also today there's a patriarch of Kiev, I believe, because the Ukrainian church separated from the Russian one after the collapse of the Soviet Union. I'm pretty certain, not 100% on this. There might be a metropolitan in Kiev, but with an autonomous church. Not entirely sure. It's weird. But yes, so what that means is that technically now our church is on an equal level with all the other Orthodox churches. So that's pretty cool. We can also make more states. I wonder why, though. I'm not sure. Let's go to the East Dawn. I'm guessing that that's going to be the most... Oh, come on. Cancel. East Dawn should be... West Dawn. East Dawn. No, Mordovia. East Dawn. I'm guessing that that's going to be the most... 45 ducats. .45 ducats. Perm is the one that we can make that has the most things, which wouldn't give us much of an increase. So East Dawn, Kazan. Kazan wouldn't give us a lot. Mordovia, not a lot. So West Dawn and East Dawn appear to be best to get states on. Let's core them up. Very good. And we can also have new missions. Whoa. Why only 12,000 manpower? I'm pretty sure it's because it needs to recalculate. Anyway, colonize Osterbotten. Osterbotten. I don't think we can get there yet. We need to go for Chem. Protect our brethren in Hommel. That's in Lithuania. Improve defenses in Tambov. Not entirely necessary because the Horde really isn't much of a threat anymore. So I guess we'll take Protect Our Brethren, which will give us a claim on Hommel. So that once Poland gets into a fight, we can go in and fight them pretty easily. Yeah, I think that we'll need a few months to pass by so that the manpower actually, yeah, 141,000 is our maximum. So huge amounts of manpower, and now we also have a lot more accepted cultures. We also have the Cossack culture, which I don't think is in any provinces. Is it? Where's my cultural map mode? Geographical? No. Probably economic, most likely. No? Political. Okay. So this is Russian, Crimean, Ukrainian. Okay. Pomor. Yeah, there's a bunch of Permian here, which we're going to have to purge. And now we're getting Russian as we colonize East. Okay. Which is historical, because there was, of course, you know, Russification. Interesting. And we can also convert provinces to Orthodoxy, because we now have that stronger church from having the Patriarchate. I believe we got a lot from that. But yes, let's start converting things. Especially Sunni provinces are important to convert. And we have 2 missionaries, do we? No, we don't. That's annoying. So yes, the notion of... sure. The notion of empire and the notion of Russia really are connected, because Russia... Okay. Russia really isn't... Well, back then it wasn't considered a nation, right? It was, of course... I guess you could say the union of the three cultures that sprung up from the separation of the Kievan Rus. So of course you have Russian, Ruthenian, and White Russian or Belarusian. So the ruler of Russia was really the ruler of all these three. And of course, I guess you could say the propaganda of the Russian state. So a Russia that isn't an empire governed by a Tsar or a Caesar isn't really something that was, you know, feasible. Because the ruler was supposed to be the one to actually be the representative of every, you know, every little group that the state had under its wing, right? And with a diverse, because it was diverse culturally, state, then you're supposed to have a emperor above it, at least in the narrative. And of course, also because the status of Caesar, or emperor, was connected to Russia being Third Rome, right? Because of course it was the successor of the Roman Empire, and so it was an empire in its own right. And also that kind of goes into the... Oh, really? Okay. That also kind of goes into how they used to call, I believe, well, what we now call the Russian culture used to be called the Great Russian culture. And I don't remember if it was the Ukrainians or the Belarusians that were called the Small Russians, or Maloruski. Because, of course, they were... It was recognized that they were different, but it was also recognized that there was a subservience of sorts. And a subservience that, most importantly, didn't really interfere with... Wait, what? Hold on. I thought that... Oh no, you are my vassal. Good. See, I saw an X and I'm like, what? And then I forgot that he was my vassal already, because I wanted to vassal him. And also, what I can do is royal marry him. Very good. Will you vassalize now, Kiev? No, you will not. That's unfortunate. Yeah, I'm just going around vassalizing small people. For example, I think I can vassalize you too. Okay, good. But I can't royal marry you because you're not Orthodox. Annoying. And you're an Altaic monarchy or a horde. Yeah, you're a horde. So you cannot enter into alliance. That's strange. That is very strange. We can still get vassalization with him if we improve our relations enough, however. So let's do that. And yeah, I think this about covers it. Rise of Russia from the Kievan Rus to the sort of semi-modern Russia. I'm just gonna call it semi-modern because truly modern Russia begins, I guess you could say, with Peter the Great. Although it's a very, of course, simplistic statement. Like, it's not literally like before Peter the Great, Russia was a bunch of barbarians, nor after Peter the Great, Russia was, you know, 100% a modern state. But that's generally what's considered the breaking point, when Russia really becomes aware that it is part of the European system of statehoods, you know, European politics, and not of, you know, a separate, only, you know, Orthodox, culturally defined by the Orthodox faith kind of deal, because that's what it was before. Russia saw itself as the bastion of orthodoxy and completely separate from the rest of the world, the rest of the Western world, in terms of cultural links, whereas Peter the Great is the first one that really kind of wants to actually, I guess, put regular ties up with the West and, you know, actually learn from Western expertise in various different things. Of course, you have the construction of St. Petersburg later on as a port city. And yeah, pretty much. So I guess you could finish by explaining why we got the claims that we got when we turned into an empire. Well, not an empire, but when we turned into Russia, why we got the claims that we got. Down the Volga, because at this point the directory of expansion was not just eastward or westward, but also southward, which sort of culminates with the capture of Astrakhan. And that essentially puts the Volga fully in the control of the Russians. And that's important because, of course, just like, yeah, convert them. Convert Catholics. I don't like Catholics. That is important because, of course, rivers were a big highway in the ancient world, as we saw with the Dnieper and the Kievan Rus and the Dwina and the Muscovy, of course, often the riches of states were kind of determined by which rivers, were present in their territories, etc., etc. So it became a transport hub, and it allowed for economic growth in these areas. And it also kind of allowed for Russia to sort of take its first step towards the Caucasus, which is considered another one of Russia's quote-unquote natural borders, because of course it is a big mountain range. Although the Caucasus is complicated, so yeah, we'll not go into it. West towards the Dnieper, because of course Russia, seeing itself as a successor to the Kievan Rus, wanted to head west, reclaim Kiev. And of course, the Dnieper, as an economic and political sort of symbol, was very important. Both due to the ties to history, and of course because of economic concerns, and because it's a defensible border, another thing which of course is quite important. And wait, we already instantly converted them. Damn. Did we really instantly convert Smanianskaya Zemlya as Catholics? Well, it seems like they're still large. Oh well, I guess it's just that we can do it a lot because we're an empire. Oi, we're not an empire. Right, it's just so obvious to me, I don't know, whatever. Activist militias, yes. New troop types are fine. Yeah, now we also get Cossacks. Yeah. Medium hussars. Or pomiste. Cossacks don't have a lot of fire, but they have pretty huge shock. Let's do pomiste cavalry. Okay. And, well, also, all these discoveries that we got, of course, are part of EU4's system, to where you get the spread of discoveries. It's complicated after 50 years that you know somebody, if they're the same religion, that they've discovered some things. It's complicated. But in real life, there's actually a quite funny little, well, I guess interesting and funny little anecdote as to how Russia got to actually know about all of this. There was this trader, merchant, adventurer guy called Afanasy Nikitin, who basically went on a trip from, I don't remember what his city was in Russia, all throughout the Middle East into India, right? I guess he was a bit of the Russian Marco Polo. And he came back and he wrote, a diary about his adventures, and it's really kind of interesting seeing this guy, well, of course it might just be fiction, but that the travel happened, it's pretty, safe, because the details are there. They are pretty, I guess, accurate. Wow, wasteland. Why is this wasteland? I'm guessing it's a impassable forest? Or a marsh of some kind? Weird. Anyway, yeah, it's kind of interesting to see this guy interfere and interact with different cultures, which kind of shows how the mentality of a more commoner type of Russian, because this guy was a trader, so part of the new emerging Russian bourgeoisie, how his mentality worked and how he related to different cultures and different religions, of course, because that's the big vehicle for which culture back then worked, and how eventually I guess he becomes desensitized with the generic xenophobia of the time. It's kind of a very interesting little thing that you can read about. And yeah, pretty much that's about it. Do we get actually more force limit from being Russia? Oh yeah, we get a lot more force limit. Good. Yeah, I probably should have looked at what my, what the event did, but I guess that's fine. Yeah, stability is pretty high. Yeah, the one problem is that we have a weak claim here, so I guess we could have a successor crisis, just like the time of troubles. Now, last thing, the time of troubles is sort of what breaks, for the first time, Ivan the Terrible's state, right? Of course, his death was the first thing, but then I said to believe in the last video that it was his son that was the one that was deposed. No, it was his grandson, I believe. He was deposed by a counselor after his there was then an assassination, a bunch of weird shit I don't really remember. There was essentially a power struggle for the throne, and Poland got involved, Scandinavia, well not Scandinavia, but back then Sweden got involved, and I believe there were also problems with hordes, etc., etc. So there was this huge giant crisis that threw Russia back for hundreds and hundreds of years of essentially development, and then that ended the line of the Rurikids. So the Rurikovich dynasty, or Rurikidi, got interrupted then and there, and was replaced at the end of the power struggles, a bit like how the War of the Roses gave rise to a new dynasty in England, the Tudors. In Russia, the new dynasty was the Romanovs. So, of course, carrying the Russian imperial crown up to the 1900s and 1917 date, in which old Russia finally died once and for all, with the two revolutions. But that's, you know, story for another time, etc., etc. Of course, you know, these big kind of crises do have the potential to just completely destroy hundreds of years of, I guess you could say, natural development of countries, as Russia experienced many different times. So yeah, thank y'all for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this. I guess you could call it sort of a mini-series. It wasn't really that long. I will be coming out with a vote video for the next MEIOU and Taxes series. The 2.0 version has been officially released. All of this was played on 1.19.1, I believe it was. But now I'll update to the new version, so there should be a lot less bugs the next time I play. And I think the next time I'll play, I'll do just something a little bit more normal, with me talking over gameplay, etc., etc. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Hope you've enjoyed. I'll see you soon. And of course, as many of you enjoyed this run, I will be doing more history-focused stuff. Like, so the reception was good, so I'm thinking that I can just do more of this stuff. Of course, it's never going to be major, but it's fun to do, so I'll do it. Yeah, see you soon.